Martin Luther and the Transformation of Europe, a dark legacy of faith, conflict, and turmoil. The 16th century was a time of profound upheaval in Europe, a period marked by the collision of faith, power, and human ambition. At the center of this maelstrom stood Martin Luther, a German monk whose defiance of the Catholic Church ignited a religious revolution that would forever alter the spiritual, political, and social landscape of Europe. Luther's actions, driven by a desire to reform what he saw as a corrupt and decadent church, unleashed forces that would lead to decades of deadly conflict, widespread suffering, and the fracturing of Christendom. While his legacy is often celebrated for its contributions to religious freedom and the birth of Protestantism, it is also a story of chaos, violence, and the dark consequences of challenging entrenched power. Now, before we move on, please help a small channel grow. Please like and subscribe. If you have any comments, good or bad, leave them below. Back to the story. The spark of Reformation, Luther's defiance. Martin Luther was born in 1483 in Eisleben, Saxony, in the Holy Roman Empire. A deeply introspective and troubled man, Luther struggled with feelings of unworthiness and a fear of divine judgment. His entry into monastic life was driven by a desperate search for spiritual salvation, but his studies and experiences only deepened his disillusionment with the Catholic Church. The Church of the early 16th century was a powerful institution, deeply intertwined with the political and economic structures of Europe. It was also rife with corruption, from the sale of indulgences, payments for the remission of sins, to the lavish lifestyles of the clergy. Luther's breaking point came in 1517, when he penned his 95 Theses, a list of grievances against the Church's practices, particularly the sale of indulgences. According to tradition, he nailed these theses to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg, an act that would become the symbolic beginning of the Protestant Reformation. Luther's ideas spread like wildfire, thanks in part to the recent invention of the printing press, which allowed his writings to circulate widely and rapidly. His central arguments, that salvation was achieved through faith alone, not works, and that the Bible, not the Church, was the ultimate authority, struck at the heart of Catholic doctrine. The Church's response, condemnation and excommunication. The Catholic Church, long accustomed to absolute authority, was quick to condemn Luther. In 1521, he was summoned to the Diet of Worms, an assembly of the Holy Roman Empire, where he was ordered to recant his writings. Luther's famous refusal, "Here I stand, I can do no other," marked his formal break with the Church. He was declared a heretic and excommunicated, a sentence that placed him outside the protection of the law and made him a target for execution. However, Luther found refuge with Frederick the Wise, Elector of Saxony, who shielded him from harm. During his time in hiding, Luther translated the New Testament into German, making the Bible accessible to ordinary people and further undermining the Church's monopoly on religious interpretation. His translation was not merely a linguistic achievement, it was a revolutionary act that empowered individuals to engage directly with Scripture, bypassing the clergy. This democratization of faith was both liberating and destabilizing, as it challenged the hierarchical structure of medieval society. The spread of Protestantism and the fracturing of Christendom. Luther's ideas resonated with many who were disillusioned with the Church's excesses and abuses. Across Europe, reformers inspired by Luther began to challenge Catholic doctrine and practice. Figures like John Calvin in Switzerland and Ulrich Zwingli in Zurich developed their own interpretations of Protestant theology, leading to the emergence of diverse Protestant movements. The Reformation was not a monolithic phenomenon, it was a fragmented and often contentious process that gave rise to a multitude of sects and denominations. The rapid spread of Protestantism alarmed the Catholic Church and the ruling elites, who saw it as a threat to their authority. The Holy Roman Empire, a patchwork of semi-independent states, became a battleground for religious and political conflict. Princes and city-states aligned themselves with either the Catholic or Protestant cause, often for reasons of political expediency rather than genuine religious conviction. This polarization set the stage for decades of violence and instability. The Peasants' War, A dark consequence of Reformation. One of the earliest and bloodiest consequences of the Reformation was the German Peasants' War of 1524 to 1525. Inspired in part by Luther's teachings on spiritual equality, peasants across Germany rose up against their feudal lords, demanding an end to serfdom, fair taxation, and the right to choose their own pastors. The rebellion was fueled by long-standing economic grievances and the hope that Luther's challenge to authority would extend to the social and political realms. However, Luther's response to the uprising was unequivocal and brutal. In his pamphlet against the Murderous, Thieving Hordes of Peasants, he condemned the rebels and urged the nobility to crush the revolt without mercy. The resulting suppression was devastating. An estimated 100,000 peasants were killed, and the rebellion was extinguished in a wave of violence and retribution. Luther's role in this tragedy remains a dark stain on his legacy, revealing the limits of his vision of reform and his willingness to side with the powerful against the oppressed. The wars of religion. Europe descends into chaos. The Reformation did not bring about a peaceful transformation of European society. Instead, it plunged the continent into a series of religious wars that would last for over a century. The conflict between Catholics and Protestants became intertwined with political rivalries, dynastic ambitions, and national identities, creating a volatile and deadly mix. In France, the Wars of Religion, 1562 to 1598, pitted Catholics against the Huguenots, French Protestants inspired by Calvinism. The conflict reached its nadir in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572, when thousands of Huguenots were slaughtered in Paris and throughout France. The violence was not merely a clash of faiths but also a struggle for power between noble factions vying for control of the monarchy. In the Holy Roman Empire, the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, became one of the most destructive conflicts in European history. What began as a local dispute between Protestant and Catholic states in Bohemia escalated into a continent-wide war involving major powers like Spain, Sweden, and France. The war was characterized by brutal atrocities, including the sack of Magdeburg in 1631, where Catholic forces massacred tens of thousands of Protestant civilians. By the time the war ended with the Peace of Westphalia, much of Central Europe lay in ruins, and an estimated 8 million people had died from violence, famine, and disease. The legacy of Luther, a divided Europe. The Reformation fundamentally reshaped Europe, but its legacy is deeply ambivalent. On one hand, Luther's challenge to the Catholic Church paved the way for religious pluralism, the rise of individualism, and the eventual development of modern democracy. His emphasis on personal faith and the authority of Scripture laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment and the secularization of European society. On the other hand, the Reformation unleashed forces of division and destruction that left Europe scarred for generations. The religious wars and persecutions that followed in its wake claimed countless lives and deepened the sectarian divides that persist to this day. The fragmentation of Christendom into competing denominations undermined the unity of European culture and contributed to the rise of nationalism and the modern nation-state. Luther himself was a complex and contradictory figure. A man of profound faith and courage, he was also prone to intolerance and vitriol, particularly in his later years. His anti-Semitic writings, such as on the Jews and their lives, have cast a long shadow over his legacy and have been cited by later generations to justify persecution and violence against Jewish communities. Conclusion: the dark side of Reformation. Martin Luther's impact on Europe cannot be overstated. He challenged the authority of the Catholic Church, reshaped the spiritual landscape of the continent, and set in motion a series of events that would transform European society. Yet, his legacy is not one of unalloyed progress or enlightenment. The Reformation he ignited was a double-edged sword, bringing both liberation and suffering, unity and division, hope and despair. The deadly conflicts and turmoil that followed in the wake of Luther's actions serve as a reminder of the profound consequences of challenging established power and the fragility of human institutions. The Reformation was not merely a theological dispute, it was a struggle for the soul of Europe, a struggle that exacted a heavy toll in blood and tears. In the end, Luther's story is a testament to the power of ideas to change the world, for better and for worse. Please like and subscribe.